You ever buy a house thinking it's going to be your peaceful oasis, only to discover you accidentally moved into a sitcom written by Satan? Yeah, that was me. 37, single, quiet by nature, recently moved to a sunny neighborhood with a backyard pool, a grill I could finally afford, and the naive hope that my days of dealing with other people's nonsense were behind me. The universe, however, had other plans, and her name was Karen Witherspoon. Let me paint a picture. Peroxide blonde bob, pastel polo shirts that screamed, "Power walk enthusiast," and a voice that sounded like a car alarm arguing with itself. Karen was the self-elected high priestess of our HOA, despite the fact that no one recalled ever voting for her. I'd only been living in Serpent Springs. Yes, that's the actual name. For 3 weeks before she was on my doorstep with a laminated rulebook and a face like she'd just smelled raw sewage. "Mr. Cole," she said, peering at me through rhinestone-studded glasses, "your lawn is precisely 1.4 inches taller than HOA regulations allow. We value uniformity here." I considered offering her a ruler and a lawn chair, but I just nodded and promised to mow. I figured that'd be the end of it. A small, annoying bump in the otherwise smooth road of homeownership. Spoiler, it wasn't. What started with grass quickly escalated. Week 2. She fined me for excessive wind chime noise. I kid you not. The wind was the criminal. My chimes were the accomplice. Then came the passive-aggressive letters about my trash bins being visible for more than 12.6 minutes after pickup. She even cited me for a non-regulation mailbox flag color. But the real war didn't begin until the pool. You see, unlike most of my neighbors, I don't use my backyard for barbecuing, Instagramming iced coffee, or manifesting good vibes. I use it for something far more productive, relaxing in silence. And floating in a cool pool on a summer evening, beer in hand, while the sun sets like a Photoshop filter gone right. That's peace. That's therapy. Apparently, Karen disagreed. It started subtly. A head over the fence. The faint sound of a TSK. Then, one afternoon, I walked out back to find Karen and 2 of her HOA minions lounging on my deck chairs like it was their private spa retreat. One even had cucumber slices on her eyes. I stood there, towel over my shoulder, blinking like a Windows XP error. Can I help you?" I asked. Karen sat up like a startled prairie dog. "Oh, we thought you were away for the weekend," she chirped, not at all embarrassed. "We needed a break from HOA stress, and your pool just looked so inviting." "Right?" I said slowly, glancing at the clear "No Trespassing" sign posted on the fence. "You know this is my private property, correct?" She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, we all own everything here. It's a community. Read your covenant agreement." Spoiler, I had read it. I'd memorized it. In fact, thanks to her weekly citations. There was nothing in there about community pool access or telepathic HOA mind control over other people's patios. Then they got up and just walked away. I turned, walked inside, and started thinking. That was the moment something shifted. I realized this wasn't just about boundaries. This was about control. And Karen, in her pastel tyranny, wasn't going to stop until my property felt like her personal resort. So, I began preparing. And I didn't need a lawyer. I didn't need a fence 7 feet high. I just needed my pets. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let me first tell you about how Karen's invasions became more frequent and bolder. Because this woman? She wasn't done. Not even close. You'd think after being caught lounging uninvited by my pool, most people would feel at least an ounce of shame. Maybe apologize, maybe back off. But Karen? She doubled down. The next morning, I woke up to find a courtesy note taped to my front door. Handwritten in aggressive cursive, it read, "Dear Mr. Cole, given the underutilized nature of your pool, the HOA has decided to consider it a shared amenity for block morale. We'll ensure it remains clean and well-respected during use. KW." That's right. She declared my private pool a public good, with the same energy Queen Victoria probably had when she claimed entire continents. I laughed, out loud, in my pajamas. Then I reread the letter to make sure I hadn't hallucinated. Nope, still there. Still insane. Now, I like to think of myself as a reasonable man. I didn't go storming into the HOA office with a flamethrower. Instead, I typed up a polite, but firm, response, complete with legal citations and a lovely little phrase Karen seemed unfamiliar with: criminal trespassing. I dropped it in her mailbox with a smile. End of story. If only. By the following Saturday, I caught her again, this time mid-cannonball. Yes, cannonball. I heard the splash from the kitchen and ran outside just in time to see Karen surfacing like a blonde torpedo and barking orders at two other women to fetch towels from the usual spot. The usual spot was my deck. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered, still in slippers. Karen beamed. "Mr. Cole, so glad you've joined us. I was just showing the gals our new wellness initiative. Hydration, sunlight, community building, and trespassing," I added deadpan. "Oh, please," she said, waving her hand again like she was trying to shoo away facts. "You can't gatekeep a pool during a heat wave. It's inhumane." I gestured around us. "Everyone else on the block seems to be surviving. Maybe you should try it." Her smile thinned, but she kept her tone sugary. "You know, you're being very oppositional for someone who just moved in. Maybe you're not the community type." "Oh, I'm community-oriented," I said. "Just not keen on self-appointed dictators with wet footprints all over my patio." It was then I realized something important. Karen didn't care about rules. She cared about control. The more I resisted, the more she pushed. This wasn't about enjoying a swim. It was about making sure I knew my place in her kingdom. That night, I installed a motion-activated camera facing the pool. Not to catch her in the act. No, that had already happened twice. But because I had a hunch she wasn't done escalating. And if she wanted to play dirty, I was going to keep the receipts. The footage began stacking up fast. Karen with a wine cooler. Karen dragging a folding chair from her trunk like she was setting up camp. Karen smuggling in a Bluetooth speaker to blast yacht rock at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. I wasn't even mad. I was impressed. The level of shamelessness bordered on Olympic. Naturally, I sent a complaint to the HOA board, though board is generous. It was basically Karen and two retirees who nodded whenever she spoke. Their response: "Mr. Cole, we see no issue with occasional shared use of private facilities if it serves neighborhood cohesion." So much for justice. That was the night I started thinking differently. If the rules wouldn't protect my space, and the board wouldn't enforce them, then I needed another method. Something subtle, something educational, something that would discourage uninvited dips. But hey, I'm getting ahead of myself again. I expected that Karen had one more poolside stunt to pull, and this one, it was the splash that finally tipped the balance. It was a Saturday morning, mid-July, heat heavy enough to melt flip-flops, and for once, I was actually planning to use my own pool. I'd made pancakes, cracked open a cold orange juice, and even queued up a playlist that didn't include smooth jazz or boomer yacht anthems. The plan? A rare day of doing absolutely nothing. But Karen had other plans. At 10:14 a.m., I heard it. The unmistakable sound of folding chairs being unfolded. Not one, not two, 6. Then the high-pitched cackle of HOA henchwoman, and finally, my personal favorite, the shrill screech of Karen's megaphone. Yes, she brought a megaphone. I opened the sliding glass door and stepped outside. What greeted me was what I now refer to as the HOA pool party from hell. Karen stood like a cruise director on the edge of my deck, barking out what I can only assume were schedule updates. "Tina, sunscreen station is over there. Mind the umbrella cord. Janice, your casserole goes on the buffet table. Yes, the one near the hibiscus. Ladies, remember, floaties are for the early bird raffle." There were snacks. There were banners. There were matching towels with the HOA logo printed on them. In my pool. On my property. I had to take a full 10 seconds of silent breathing so I didn't spontaneously combust on the spot. Then, with saint-like calm, I walked over to the cooler someone had helpfully dragged next to my garden gnome, opened it, and pulled out a soda. I cracked it open like I was in a sitcom and said, "Morning, Karen. I see you've colonized my yard again." She turned to me, megaphone still in hand, grinning like she was running for office. "Mr. Cole, you're just in time. We're about to start Aqua Zumba." I looked at her. I looked at the 70-something woman in a sun hat already stretching by the shallow end. Then I looked at the HOA-themed pool noodle someone had left floating across the deep end like it paid rent. "You're trespassing," I said. "Oh, come on," she laughed. "No one's getting hurt. This is building community spirit." "You're building a lawsuit," I muttered. And you know what she did? She winked. Like I was the unreasonable one. Like my refusal to allow a rogue aquatic HOA flash mob on my deck made me a social outcast. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a power trip. This was personal. Karen had decided she didn't just dislike me. She needed to win against me. She needed the neighborhood to see me as the recluse, the curmudgeon, the weirdo who wouldn't share his pool with the ladies. And so, I let them have their party. I didn't yell. I didn't call the cops. Instead, I went back inside, locked the door, and walked into the guest room. That's where I keep the climate-controlled tank. That's where my two little buddies had been resting since spring. I opened the enclosure, checked the temperature, misted the inside. Then I leaned in and said, "You two might be getting some fresh air soon." They flicked their tongues at me. Reinforcements were on the way. They just didn't know it yet. But before any of that could happen, Karen had one more surprise to spring on me. One that involved the words community swim calendar and a clipboard. Because of course she did. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in a manila envelope. No return address. Just my name in shaky pen and a suspicious amount of glitter leaking from the seams. Inside was a folded calendar sheet, clearly homemade, with clip art beach balls and the words, "Serpent Springs Community Pool Schedule, July edition." Below it was a chart with names, days, and time slots. Karen had scheduled my pool. Monday, water aerobics with Cheryl. Tuesday, HOA book club splash session. Wednesday, sunset serenity soak, BYO Rose. Saturday, kids free swim, supervised by Karen, of course. And at the very bottom, please be respectful of Mr. Cole's limited use time. Thursdays, 3 to 5 p.m. I stood at my kitchen counter, calendar in hand, and felt my brain skip a gear. Not only had she assumed dominion over my backyard, but she'd now assigned me designated swim hours on my own property. Like I was a guest. Like I was a tenant in my own life. It was so delusional, I laughed. Loudly. Like a man who's just realized the HOA president thinks she's Neptune, god of chlorinated territory. I didn't bother replying. I didn't rip it up. I simply folded it back into the envelope, set it on the counter, and opened my laptop. The next 40 minutes were spent confirming what I already knew. No HOA, no matter how inflated their ego, could commandeer private property without consent or legal ownership. And Karen? She had neither. But still, I didn't go nuclear. Not yet. Instead, I began prepping the guest room. Laid out the transport container. Prepped the heat pads. Adjusted the humidity. I even cleaned out the back patio enclosure I hadn't used in over a year, just in case. Because if Karen wanted to pretend this was a jungle resort, I figured it was time to complete the theme. But I waited. Carefully. Patiently. I let her get comfortable. Over the next few days, the pool party parade continued. A trio of women practiced synchronized noodle routines while sipping wine spritzers. A guy named Doug started coming over with his waterproof speaker and blasting 80s hits like he was auditioning for a cruise ship. At one point, Karen even set up a folding cabana tent with curtains. She'd moved in, metaphorically and emotionally, if not legally. Though frankly, I wasn't sure she wouldn't try the legal route next. Then came the final straw. I got a notification from my security cam app at 6:18 a.m. Thursday. I opened the feed and nearly snorted coffee through my nose. Karen, in a bathrobe, hair wrapped in a towel, stepping through the gate with a French press and a yoga mat. Alone, confident, like she was preparing for a personal spiritual cleanse in the Garden of Eden. Only, Eden had a floating cooler and deck chairs she didn't pay for. She'd claimed my Thursday morning swim slot for herself. I watched the footage twice. Then I reached for the transport bin. The boys were going out today. And no, I didn't tell them to do anything. I didn't have to. All I did was introduce Karen to the true spirit of Serpent Springs. Let me set the stage. It was a Friday afternoon, just past 3. The heat index was flirting with 100, The kind of weather that turns flip-flops into marshmallows and gives HOA presidents heat-stroke-level delusions of grandeur. I kept quiet all day. No warnings. No final letters. No dramatic speeches. Just opened the patio enclosure, set the temperature, laid out the ramp to the shallow end, and let my two scaly gentlemen enjoy some fresh air. Let me clarify for those still imagining metaphor. They're real pythons. Two of them, named Tango and Cash. Ball pythons. Not dangerous, not aggressive, unless you're a rodent. Or, perhaps, a trespasser with an aversion to snakes and a megaphone complex. They glided through the water like nature's chillest submarines, sunning on the edge, dipping in and out like reptilian royalty. For them, it was spa day. For me, it was passive defense. And then, right on cue, Karen strutted through the gate. Now, I hadn't invited her. I hadn't texted her. I'd even taken down the fake community swim sign she'd stapled to the fence. But entitlement, like mold, doesn't wait for permission. She was dressed in a flamingo print one-piece and oversized sunglasses, holding a clipboard like she was there for an audit. Behind her followed the usual crew, Janice, Cheryl, and Doug with his speaker, of course. "All right, ladies and gents," Karen chirped, stepping onto the deck. "We'll begin with a gentle warm-up, followed by our wine and water ball toss." And then she saw them. Tango was halfway out of the pool, sunning himself on the concrete with the serenity of a monk. Cash was still in the water, coiled loosely near a pink pool noodle that was suddenly regretting its color choices. Karen froze. Her clipboard clattered to the deck. There was a beat, just long enough for the others to step closer and squint. And then Janice let out a shriek that may have cracked a window. Doug dropped his speaker into the bushes. Cheryl tripped over her flow tie. But Karen? Karen screamed. I don't mean a cute shriek. I mean a full-bodied, lung-rattling banshee wail like she'd walked in on a crime scene. Or worse, an unpermitted pergola. She stumbled backward, nearly fell into a chair, then caught herself, hair askew, glasses crooked. And for the first time since I'd moved in, she looked human. Fallible. Like someone who realized she'd brought a clipboard to a python fight. What? What is this? She screeched, clutching her pearls, which, by the way, were absolutely fake. Those, I said, stepping outside with my drink. Oh, those are just my emotional support animals. The HOA can't regulate therapy pets, right? Her mouth opened and closed like a trout gasping for logic. You brought snakes into a neighborhood pool. No, I said calmly. My pool. You just brought the neighborhood. The others were already halfway to the gate. Janice had left a sandal. Doug abandoned his speaker. Karen stood there alone, sputtering like a malfunctioning sprinkler system. This is harassment. I will report this. I shrugged. To who? Animal control? They're registered. Legal. And frankly, friendlier than you've ever been. She stormed off, muttering threats and probable Latin curses. I watched her retreat, towel flapping behind her like a defeated cape. That was the last time she ever crossed my patio line. Oh, she tried. She sent more letters. Claimed the snakes violated aesthetic unity. Held an emergency HOA meeting with an audience of 3 and a confused raccoon. But the spell had broken. The neighborhood wasn't scared of her anymore. They were too busy watching the security footage I may or may not have emailed to a few people with the subject line. Karen meets karma. These days, the pool is peaceful. The boys still swim from time to time, but only when I let them. Karen? She keeps her distance. Though every now and then, I catch her peeking through the fence slats. Probably checking for snakes. Probably rethinking her career as Queen of Chlorine. And me? I finally get to enjoy my backyard again. Because sometimes, the best fence is 8 feet of calm, coiled deterrent sunning itself on a deck chair. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.